The alien ships descended like shadows swallowing the sky. They were enormous, their metallic surfaces glinting ominously in the sunlight as they hovered above New York City. People froze in the streets, staring upward with a mix of fear and awe. The air was thick with tension, and the usual hum of life in the city had been replaced by an eerie silence. Then came the voice, cold, mechanical, and devoid of emotion. It echoed through every device, every speaker, and even seemed to vibrate in the bones of those who heard it. "Humans," the voice began, "you are weak. Your weapons are primitive. Your defenses are insignificant. Surrender now or face annihilation." The message ended abruptly, leaving behind a heavy stillness that pressed down on everyone below. The speaker identified himself as Commander Vrax of the Zorathian Empire, but his words carried no room for negotiation. Humanity had 24 hours to comply, or else. In a quiet military base just outside Chicago, Captain Ryan Cole stood in front of a large map spread across a table. His team gathered around him, their faces grim but resolute. Lieutenant Emily Dawson leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the map while her fingers tapped nervously against the edge of the table. Sergeant Jake Miller crossed his arms, his jaw tight with determination, and Corporal Laura Bennett adjusted the strap of her rifle slung over her shoulder. These 4 soldiers were part of an elite Special Forces unit, trained for high-stakes missions where failure wasn't an option. Ryan looked at each of them, his expression serious but steady. "We've got less than a day to figure out how to handle this," he said, his voice calm but firm. "These aliens think we're going to roll over because they've got bigger guns and fancier tech, but they don't know us yet." Emily nodded slowly. "They're arrogant," she added. "That's good for us. Arrogance makes people sloppy." Jake snorted. "Or maybe they're not sloppy. They're just that confident. You saw what happened when they blew up Paris last week. No warning, no explanation. Just destruction." Laura shifted uncomfortably. "So what do we do? Sit here and wait for them to wipe us out?" "No," Ryan replied sharply. "We fight back, not head-on. We can't win that way. We strike smart, hit hard, and make them regret setting foot on our planet." As the hours ticked by, news poured in from all over the world. Governments scrambled to respond, some considering surrender while others prepared desperate countermeasures. Meanwhile, the Zorathians wasted no time. When the deadline passed without a response, their ships moved into position, deploying ground forces near Washington, D.C. Massive biomechanical creatures marched through the streets, their armor gleaming under the pale light of dawn. They moved with unnatural speed and precision, cutting down anything that dared to oppose them. Ryan and his team watched footage of the invasion from a secure bunker. Civilians ran screaming as buildings crumbled and vehicles exploded. The Zorathians showed no mercy, no hesitation. They were efficient killing machines, designed to dominate. But Ryan noticed something important. Despite their overwhelming power, the aliens weren't invincible. Their movements followed patterns, predictable ones. And their armor, though advanced, had vulnerable spots at the joints. If they could exploit these weaknesses, they might stand a chance. "We need to get closer," Ryan said finally, breaking the silence. "See how they operate up close. Find out if there's a way to hurt them." His team exchanged uneasy glances, but didn't argue. They knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity wouldn't go down without a fight. As they geared up for their mission, Ryan reminded himself of one thing. The Zorathians might have technology, but humans had something far more powerful: sheer willpower. The mission began under the cover of darkness. Ryan and his team moved silently through the ruins of a suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from distant explosions and the faint hum of alien machinery in the distance. Buildings lay in shambles, their walls cracked and windows shattered. Cars were abandoned in the middle of the road, some still running with keys left in the ignition. It was as if the entire area had been frozen in time when the invasion started. Ryan held up a hand, signaling the team to stop. They crouched behind the remains of a burned-out truck, scanning the area ahead. A group of Zorethian soldiers patrolled the street, their biomechanical bodies glinting under the pale moonlight. They moved with unnatural grace, their armored limbs clicking softly with each step, their heads turned sharply, sensors scanning for any sign of movement. Ryan watched them carefully, noting how they communicated with short bursts of static-like noises that seemed almost like a language. "They're thorough," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're not missing anything." Jake adjusted his grip on his rifle. "Yeah, but they're sticking to a pattern. Look, they always pause at the corners before moving forward." Ryan nodded. "That's our opening. We wait until they turn away, then slip past them. Stay low and keep quiet." The team waited patiently, their breaths shallow to avoid making noise. When the aliens finally turned a corner, Ryan signaled for them to move. They darted across the street, keeping close to the shadows. Laura stumbled slightly on a piece of debris, but Jake quickly grabbed her arm to steady her. She shot him a grateful glance, and they pressed on. Their goal was to get close enough to observe the aliens' tactics without being detected. As they reached the edge of the patrol zone, they found a partially collapsed building that offered a good vantage point. Ryan climbed up first, followed by Emily, Jake, and Laura. From their perch, they could see a larger group of Zorethians gathered around a convoy of human vehicles they had captured. The aliens were methodically dismantling the vehicles, stripping them for parts while ignoring the wounded soldiers lying nearby. Laura clenched her fists. "We can't just sit here and watch." "We have to," Ryan replied firmly. "This is recon. If we act now, we'll get ourselves killed, and the rest of the resistance won't learn anything." As they observed, the Zorethians suddenly stopped what they were doing. One of them raised a clawed hand, its head tilting as if listening to something. Then, without warning, it fired a beam of energy at a nearby alleyway. There was a scream, followed by the sound of rubble collapsing. A small group of civilians who had been hiding emerged, hands raised in surrender. The aliens didn't hesitate. They opened fire, cutting the humans down in seconds. Emily looked away, her face pale. "They don't take prisoners," she muttered. "No mercy at all." Jake shook his head. "Monsters." But Ryan's focus remained sharp. He noticed how the aliens reloaded their weapons, how they positioned themselves during combat, and how their armor restricted certain movements. "Their joints are exposed," he said quietly. "If we can hit those spots, we might be able to take them down." The team stayed hidden until the aliens finished their work and moved on. Once the coast was clear, they slipped back into the shadows, heading toward their extraction point. On the way, they passed the bodies of the civilians. Laura knelt beside one, closing the woman's eyes gently. Her hands trembled as she stood back up. "We'll make them pay," Ryan said, his voice firm, but tinged with sadness. "Every single one of them." When they returned to base, Ryan immediately called a meeting with the other leaders of the resistance. Using sketches and notes, he explained what they had learned about the Zorethians' weaknesses. His plan was simple: use guerrilla tactics to strike fast and hard, targeting the aliens' weak points and disappearing before they could retaliate. The room was silent for a moment before someone spoke up. "It's risky," another officer said, "but it's the best shot we've got." Ryan nodded. "They think we're helpless. Let's show them they're wrong." The next morning, Ryan and his team prepared for their first real test of the new strategy. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance to prove that guerrilla tactics could work against the Zorethians. They gathered in a small warehouse on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by crates of scavenged weapons and supplies. The air smelled of oil and rust, and the dim light from a single bulb cast long shadows across the room. Ryan stood in front of a map pinned to the wall, pointing out key locations. "We'll hit them where they least expect it," he said, his voice steady. "Their patrols are predictable, and their armor has weak spots. We'll use narrow streets and alleys to our advantage. Stay mobile, stay quiet, and don't engage unless you have a clear shot." Emily nodded, checking her rifle one last time. "We've got this," she said, though her hands betrayed a hint of nervousness. She had spent hours practicing aiming for the joints in the alien's armor, knowing that precision would be crucial. Jake tightened the strap on his backpack, which was filled with homemade explosives. "Let's hope these things do the trick," he muttered. Laura adjusted her goggles, her expression focused but calm. She had volunteered to act as the team's scout, relying on her quick reflexes to spot danger before it found them. The target was a Zorathian supply depot located near an old highway overpass. Intelligence suggested that the aliens were using it as a staging ground for further attacks. If the team could destroy the depot, it would disrupt the invaders' operations and send a message. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. They moved out just after sunset, sticking to the shadows as they approached the depot. The area was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant hum of alien machinery. Laura took point, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. Behind her, Ryan and Emily followed closely, while Jake brought up the rear, carrying the explosives. As they neared the overpass, Laura signaled for the team to stop. Ahead, a group of Zorathians stood guard near the entrance to the depot. Their glowing red sensors swept the area methodically, searching for threats. Ryan motioned for the team to split up. Emily and Jake would circle around to the far side of the depot, setting charges along the base of the overpass. Meanwhile, Ryan and Laura would create a diversion, drawing the guards away from the explosives. "On my mark," Ryan whispered into his radio. He waited until Emily gave the signal that she and Jake were in position. Then, with a deep breath, he raised his rifle and fired a single shot, hitting one of the guards squarely in the joint of its leg. The alien staggered, letting out a high-pitched screech that echoed through the night. The other guards turned toward the sound, their weapons raised. Ryan and Laura didn't wait. They sprinted into the open, firing carefully aimed shots at the exposed joints of the alien's armor. The creatures roared in anger, giving chase as Ryan led them farther away from the depot. On the far side of the overpass, Emily and Jake worked quickly, planting explosives at strategic points. Jake's hands moved with practiced efficiency, securing each charge firmly in place. "Done," he whispered, wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's get out of here." Back near the entrance, Ryan and Laura continued their retreat, dodging blasts of energy from the pursuing aliens. Just as the Zorathians closed in, a deafening explosion rocked the area. The overpass collapsed in a cloud of dust and debris, crushing the supply depot beneath it. The aliens froze, their glowing sensors flickering as they processed what had happened. Ryan smiled grimly. "That's how we do it," he said into his radio. "Good work, everyone." The team regrouped at a safe distance, watching as the dust settled over the ruins of the depot. For the first time in days, there was a glimmer of hope. They had struck back, and they had won. The victory at the supply depot was a small but significant win for Ryan and his team. News of their success spread quickly through the resistance, inspiring others to adopt similar tactics. However, the cost of their efforts was becoming harder to ignore. The constant fighting was taking its toll, not just on their bodies, but on their spirits. A few days after the depot mission, the team was sent on another operation, this time targeting an alien communications array hidden in the ruins of a suburban mall. The array allowed the Zorathians to coordinate their forces across the region, making it a priority target. If they could destroy it, it would disrupt the invaders' ability to communicate effectively. The mission started smoothly. Under the cover of darkness, Ryan, Emily, Jake, and Laura moved through the shattered remains of the mall. Shattered glass crunched underfoot, and the air smelled of smoke and decay. Laura led the way, her sharp eyes scanning every shadow for danger. Behind her, Jake carried a heavy pack filled with explosives, while Emily and Ryan kept watch, their rifles ready. As they approached the communications array, they encountered a problem. The Zorathians had set up automated defense systems around the area, turrets mounted on the walls that scanned relentlessly for intruders. Ryan studied the setup carefully. "We can't go straight in," he whispered. "Those turrets will cut us down before we get close." Emily nodded, pointing to a maintenance tunnel running beneath the floor. "What about that? It might lead us closer without triggering the guns." Ryan agreed. "Let's try it. Stay low and quiet." The team crawled into the narrow tunnel, the air thick with dust and the stench of old wiring. Jake grunted as he squeezed through, his pack scraping against the walls. "I hate tight spaces," he muttered under his breath. Laura shushed him, glancing back nervously. They couldn't afford any mistakes. After what felt like hours, they emerged near the base of the communications tower. Jake set to work planting explosives while Emily kept watch. Ryan and Laura covered the exits, their weapons trained on the shadows. But just as Jake finished setting the charges, disaster struck. A hidden mine detonated beneath his foot, sending a shockwave through the group. "Jake!" Laura shouted, rushing to his side. His leg was badly injured, blood pooling around him. He gritted his teeth, trying not to cry out. "I'm fine," he lied, though his face was pale with pain. "Just finish the job." Ryan hesitated, torn between finishing the mission and helping his teammate. Emily stepped forward, her voice firm. "We need to move now. I'll stay with him and cover you." Reluctantly, Ryan nodded. "Laura, with me. Let's get this done." Together, they sprinted toward the tower, dodging blasts from the turrets. Ryan fired back, hitting one of the machines squarely in its sensor. It sparked and went silent, giving them a brief opening to reach the control panel. They activated the detonator just as the remaining turrets zeroed in on them. "Go!" Ryan yelled, pulling Laura away from the tower. Behind them, the explosives detonated, sending a massive fireball into the sky. The communications array collapsed in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Back at the tunnel, Emily helped Jake hobble toward the extraction point. She fired bursts from her rifle to hold off pursuing aliens, her hand steady despite the chaos. When they finally reunited with Ryan and Laura, the relief was palpable, but short-lived. 2 members of their unit were missing, presumed dead during the escape. At the base, tensions flared. Some soldiers questioned whether these victories were worth the losses. Ryan listened silently, his jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke. "Every life matters," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But if we give up now, everything we've fought for is lost. We're buying time for humanity to regroup, to adapt, to survive." Jake, resting on a cot with his leg bandaged, looked up. "And maybe, to strike back even harder," he added weakly. Despite his injury, there was determination in his eyes. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the road ahead would be long and brutal. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough to keep going. The days that followed the communications array mission were tense. The resistance had scored another victory, but the losses weighed heavily on everyone. Jake was recovering in the infirmary, his leg wrapped in bandages and propped up on a makeshift cot. Laura spent hours by his side, offering quiet encouragement while he grimaced through the pain. Emily buried herself in her work, poring over intercepted Zorathian transmissions in hopes of finding something, anything, that could give humanity an edge. Ryan, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt. He replayed every decision from the last mission in his mind, wondering if there had been a way to save the 2 soldiers who hadn't made it back. But there was no time for self-doubt. The Zorathians weren't slowing down, and neither could they. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily burst into the war room where Ryan was studying maps. Her face was flushed with excitement. "I cracked it," she said breathlessly, holding up a tablet. "Their command structure, it's centralized." Ryan frowned. "Centralized? What do you mean?" Emily explained quickly, pointing to diagrams on the screen. All their ground operations are controlled remotely from a central hub orbiting Earth. It's like a giant brain sending orders to every soldier and machine down here. Without it, their forces would be disorganized, chaotic. Ryan's eyes narrowed as he processed the information. If we take out the hub, we cripple their entire invasion, Emily finished. But it's not going to be easy. The hub is protected by layers of defenses, drones, energy shields, the works. Jake, leaning on crutches, limped into the room just in time to hear the tail end of the conversation. Sounds impossible, he said with a wry grin. Just the way we like it. Laura joined them moments later, carrying a tray of coffee. So what's the plan? She asked, handing cups around. Ryan studied the tablet, his mind racing. We need to get close enough to plant explosives inside the hub. But how do we even reach it? Emily hesitated before answering. There might be a way. I intercepted data about a captured alien ship being held at a nearby base. If we can modify its systems, we could use it to sneak past their outer defenses. Ryan nodded slowly. It's risky. If they detect us, we're dead, Jake interrupted bluntly. But honestly, when has this fight ever been safe? The team spent the next few days preparing for the mission. They worked tirelessly, modifying the alien ship's controls and rehearsing their roles. Jake insisted on joining them despite his injury, arguing that his experience was too valuable to leave behind. Ryan finally relented, knowing they needed every advantage they could get. On the eve of the mission, the team gathered in the hangar where the alien ship was stored. Its sleek, metallic surface gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ryan stood in front of it, addressing the group one last time. This is our shot, he said firmly. Not just to hurt them, but to show them that we'll never stop fighting. No matter what happens, remember why we're doing this. Laura adjusted her gear, her hand steady. For everyone who didn't make it this far, she said quietly. Emily nodded. And for everyone who's counting on us. Jake leaned on his crutches, managing a crooked smile. Let's make some fireworks. As they boarded the ship, Ryan took a deep breath. The weight of what lay ahead pressed down on him, but he pushed it aside. Failure wasn't an option. Not now. The engines roared to life, and the ship lifted off, disappearing into the night sky. Behind them, Earth grew smaller and smaller, its surface scarred by the war raging across its lands. Ahead loomed the alien command hub, a massive structure bristling with weapons and glowing with ominous energy. The team knew the odds were against them, but they also knew one thing for certain. Humanity's survival depended on what happened next. The alien command hub loomed ahead, its massive form floating silently in the darkness of space. It was a fortress of steel and light, surrounded by layers of drones and energy shields that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. Ryan gripped the controls of the captured ship tightly, his knuckles white, as he guided it closer. The team sat in tense silence behind him, each lost in their own thoughts. Emily monitored the ship's systems, her eyes glued to the screens in front of her. They haven't detected us yet, she whispered, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. But we're about to enter the outer defense zone. Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his injured leg throbbing painfully. He clenched his teeth, but didn't complain. Laura checked her rifle one last time, her hand steady despite the fear creeping into her chest. They all knew what was at stake. If they failed, humanity's last hope would vanish. As the ship approached the first layer of defenses, alarms blared inside the cockpit. Red warning lights flashed across the dashboard. "They're onto us," Emily shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. She activated the ship's cloaking device, masking their presence just as a swarm of alien drones sped toward them. Ryan maneuvered the ship carefully, dodging blasts of energy from the drones. "Hold on," he yelled as the ship rocked violently from an impact. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the smell of burning wires filled the air. Jake cursed under his breath, gripping the edge of his seat to steady himself. "Laura, take the turret," Ryan ordered. Laura scrambled to the rear of the ship, where a mounted weapon had been installed during their preparations. She aimed carefully, firing bursts of energy at the drones. One exploded in a shower of metal fragments, but two more took its place. The ship shook again as another blast hit its side. "We're not going to make it through like this," Jake shouted, his voice strained. "We need to draw them away." Ryan nodded grimly. "Emily, divert power to the engines. Full speed ahead. We'll lead them away from the hub's main entrance." Emily complied, rerouting energy to the thrusters. The ship surged forward, narrowly avoiding a collision with the drone. The aliens followed relentlessly, their weapons firing nonstop. Laura continued to fight back, her aim steady even as the ship jolted and shuddered around her. Finally, they reached the hub's docking bay. Ryan brought the ship to a stop, its damaged hull groaning in protest. "This is it," he said, turning to face the team. "Remember the plan. Stick together, and don't let your guard down." The team disembarked quickly, moving through the dimly lit corridors of the alien structure. The air was cold and metallic, and strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls. Emily led the way, consulting her tablet to guide them toward the core reactor. Jake limped along beside her, clutching a rifle with determination. Laura kept watch behind them, her eyes scanning every shadow for threats. They split into two groups near a junction. Ryan and Jake headed to the reactor, while Emily and Laura went to sabotage the communication arrays. "Good luck," Ryan said before parting ways. As Ryan and Jake reached the reactor room, they found it guarded by a group of Zorathian soldiers. The aliens turned toward them, their glowing sensors locking onto the intruders. "Now or never," Ryan muttered, raising his weapon. They opened fire, targeting the joints in the aliens' armor. The creatures screeched in anger, charging forward with terrifying speed. Meanwhile, Emily and Laura worked frantically to disable the communication systems. Alarms blared around them as alien guards closed in. Laura fired her rifle, holding them off while Emily planted explosives on the equipment. "Done," Emily shouted, grabbing Laura's arm. "Let's go." Back at the reactor, Ryan and Jake finished planting their charges. "Detonator armed," Ryan said, checking the timer. "We've got 5 minutes. Move." But as they turned to leave, Jake stumbled, his injured leg giving out beneath him. Ryan hesitated, torn between escaping and helping his teammate. Jake looked up at him, his expression resolute. "Go," he said firmly. "I'll hold them off." "No," Ryan replied, shaking his head. "We started this together. We finish it together." With great effort, Ryan helped Jake to his feet, supporting him as they limped toward the exit. Behind them, the reactor began to hum ominously, signaling the countdown to destruction. The two men pushed themselves harder than ever before, knowing their lives depended on reaching the ship in time. When they reunited with Emily and Laura at the docking bay, the entire hub trembled violently. "Go, go, go," Ryan yelled as they boarded the ship. Emily launched the vessel just as the reactor exploded, sending a shockwave rippling through the structure. The alien command hub exploded in a blinding flash of light, its massive structure crumbling into pieces that drifted silently into the void of space. The shockwave rippled outward, shaking the ship as Emily piloted it away from the destruction. Inside the cockpit, the team sat in stunned silence, their faces pale with exhaustion and relief. They had done it. They had struck a devastating blow to the Zorathian forces. But the victory was bittersweet. Jake leaned heavily against the wall, his injured leg throbbing painfully. Laura stared out the window at the wreckage, her hands trembling as she clutched her rifle. Ryan sat quietly, his eyes closed, replaying every moment of the mission in his mind. Emily focused on flying the ship back toward Earth, her expression determined but weary. As they re-entered Earth's atmosphere, the damage below came into view. Cities were in ruins, their skylines reduced to jagged skeletons of steel and concrete. Smoke rose from countless fires, and the scars of battle stretched across the land. But amidst the devastation, there were signs of hope. Resistance fighters could be seen regrouping in the streets, their faces hardened but defiant. The loss of the command hub had thrown the Zorathians into chaos, leaving their ground forces disorganized and vulnerable. When the team landed at a hidden resistance base, they were greeted by cheers and applause. Soldiers rushed forward, patting them on the back and offering words of gratitude. News of their success had spread quickly, inspiring others to join the fight. For the first time in weeks, there was a sense of momentum, a belief that humanity might actually stand a chance. But the celebration was short-lived. Ryan gathered the team in a quiet corner of the base, away from the noise. "We did good," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But we lost people along the way. Too many." Emily nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "They sacrificed everything so we could keep going. We owe it to them to finish this." Jake shifted uncomfortably, wincing as he adjusted his position. "Yeah, but let's not kid ourselves. This isn't over yet. The Zorathians aren't just going to give up." Laura spoke up, her voice steady despite the weight of what they'd been through. "Maybe not. But we've shown them something. They're not invincible. And neither are we." Ryan looked at each of them, pride swelling in his chest. These soldiers, his friends, had faced unimaginable odds and refused to back down. They weren't heroes because they wanted to be. They were heroes because they had no other choice. "We'll keep fighting," he said firmly. "For everyone who didn't make it this far. For everyone still counting on us." In the days that followed, the Resistance launched a series of counterattacks against the Zorathians. Without the coordination of their command hub, the aliens struggled to respond effectively. Human forces struck hard and fast, reclaiming territory piece by piece. Civilians began to emerge from hiding, banding together to rebuild what had been lost. At a memorial service held for fallen soldiers, Emily delivered a heartfelt eulogy. Standing before a crowd of solemn faces, she spoke of courage, sacrifice, and the indomitable spirit of humanity. "We may not have their technology," she said, her voice strong and clear, "but we have something they'll never understand. Heart. That's why we'll win." As the sun set over the battered landscape, Ryan stood on a hill overlooking the battlefield. The scars of war were everywhere, but so was the promise of renewal. The Zorathians had underestimated humanity, and they would pay the price for that mistake. Behind him, Jake limped up the hill, leaning on a cane. "You thinking about calling it quits?" he asked with a weak smile. Ryan shook his head. "Not a chance. We've got a planet to save." Together, they turned to face the horizon, ready to continue the fight. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but one thing was certain: humanity wasn't going down without a fight.